Hello, my name is Carlos McBride. My book that I'll be talking about today is A Fly for Prosecution by Emily Golf. And this book tells the readers how insects can help criminal investigators do their job. The reason I chose this book is because I've always been curious about the crime scenes and how various sources of other information can help either complicate or solve impossible crimes that we otherwise would not have had solutions to or without nature's help. The use of using insects to help to solve numerous types of crimes scenes was not taken seriously until the identification of maggots and flies to rotten meat, or in this case, corpses, and around until the 1600s. The first practical use of using maggots or flies in investigations was not until 1885 in France, when a infant was murdered and was found beneath a tree, and was needed to figure out how long ago the infant died. And so the person who was in charge was Dr. Birgert de Brois. He was the first person in the Western, within the New World, to use a technique of etymology to help identify when the infant died. And with Dr. Birgert de Brois' help, they found out that the person who murdered the infant was the people who were living in the house last. And this was not the first time the use of entomology for forensic purposes was used. And over the course of history, there were numerous times. An example was in a case in Scotland, September 29th, 1935. There was a maid who found a dismembered arm on a bridge over a small river. The arm belonged to a woman named Miss Kurtz, who was a wife of a physician, Mr. Kurtz. Eventually, they found the rest of her body, but the thing is, they didn't know when she died. So the use of entomology was greatly needed, and without that, they would not have known that she was killed 15 to 14 days ago during the crime scene anyway, and wouldn't have determined that the murderer was her own husband. They figured out that he murdered her because there were multiple evidence against him. There was a cut on finger, and also the precise cuts on the body was only due to a physician or someone who was really well known with human anatomy. And also that the cleaning lady or the maid was remembered smelling a foul odor coming from the residence where they lived. And eventually Mr. Kurtz was convicted of murder and hanged to death. And yeah, he died. Excuse me. That was only one of an example of how insects and maggots have helped the world with solving cases. My favorite part would most likely be that how countless tales of people eventually found happiness, or not happiness, thankfulness or gratefulness of how their loved ones died, and how the people who hurt them in so many ways eventually got caught and got punished for those actions. Not to mention that even if a maggot or fly could help a person identify a body, just imagine that. Not to mention that there was also a crime scene in the book that the use of the maggots helped identify a specifically, who was killed in wildlife due to two reasons. One would be he was without proper clothes, he died of hypothermia, and the other was he was under the dose of cocaine. So yeah, that was a fun thing. I've learned a lot from this book, actually. How old and size of maggots accurately determine the age, the size, and how old the person died. And not to mention how other forces helped or made it harder to identify the body's date of passing. The study of entomology has been a long road, necessarily because there will have to be numerous trials and errors to determine if what someone is saying is right or wrong, and if they did not know the proper knowledge, they could ultimately mess with someone's life for eternity. My overall impression of the book was it was fascinating, but if I'm going to be honest, I wasn't really the biggest fan of reading scientific books, just because I'm not really into scientific knowledge and all that. If I'm not forced to. I like it on my own time, if you understand what I mean. I also couldn't understand some of the scientific words without looking up on the internet or asking friends or family what they meant. So that didn't really help. But I am glad I read it, because I've learned a lot, because recently there have been a lot of crimes and other disastrous events that, if needed to, I could use my knowledge to help the greater good. But for the most part, I'm on a 50-50. But yeah, I am glad I read it though. And that is my report on A Fly for the Prosecution by M. Lee Golf.